everybody. Welcome. I'm going to share my screen here and take you guys through pitch deck design. So without further ado, is everybody seeing the screen here pretty clearly? Good. Yeah. All right, great. So I want to start things off just by showing a few examples of pitch decks. And a lot of these things you can find online. You could ask other artists. This is from Adventure Time, which I'm sure everybody has heard of. This is a classmate of mine, went on to create this amazing show. So he sold this to Cartoon Network, and just flipping through, you can see there's character introductions, a show title, a little bit about the main characters, about like the feel, the mood of the show. And it just goes on through what that world is going to look like. All right, and so he put his own take on this, introducing Jake the dog character, a little write-up about him. And, it goes on. It's about, I think it's only about 30 pages long, the whole thing. And that it'll vary from show to show and what exactly you're trying to pitch about how much you're going to have. Some are going to be really short, some are going to be really long, some aren't going to look like this at all. But you can see, you get a sense of what the show is going to feel like, what it's going to possibly look like. There's some concept art in there. There's like art with ideas, and then there's a couple write-up about what episodes might look like. So that's one example. And there's another example, which would be totally different, a show that I worked on. This is a web series we sold back in 2012, I think. And by contrast, this is super short. Oops, I'm so sorry. How do we go back here? I have an error here with my thing. It's very short. But I'll show you one third example. My father-in-law's show, Cow and Chicken, was produced in the 90s. And he actually just had a children's book. And this was his pitch deck. And so the same thing, it showed all the characters, it showed what the world would be like. It literally told a story. And it just sort of gave a good sense of what his world was, who the characters are, what sort of adventures they get into, what sort of things they do. And I think his, it was like a 20, 30 page book again, about the same length. So I just want to take you guys through a couple of variations of what a pitch deck actually looks like, in case nobody's seen one before. But you can see that they're all pretty different, right? The content was pretty different. The look of it all was different. In my example, which you didn't see, it was just a character sheet about the main character, a couple backgrounds, and then clips from what sort of look I was going for based on other stuff. So I think it was a New Yorker comic meets The Far Side meets Ronald Searle. So I had that literally in the pitch deck. But the one thing that they do all have in common, which is what you typically would want to have in a pitch deck, is you want to have, a quick read on your characters, whether it's a write-up or just an image or a little vignette. They should be able to look at the page, read like a quick little blurb, and who your characters are, what they look like, what their personalities are. Concept art to illustrate like the world and the style of your show, and a lot of like picture book type. Like if this were a kid's book, what would the picture book version of it be? And that's a really good way to approach a pitch deck, is like create just a little vignette, just a little story in one image that gets a whole episode across, or a whole scene across, or the character moment across. You can include stuff like concept art. Some pitch Bibles have it, some don't. If you have, what the characters might look like, what the backgrounds might look like. And again, like I mentioned before, any sort of reference material. Oh, my show is like this one, or it's like a mashup between The Matrix and Back to the Future, or whatever it is you're gonna have your show be. The main point of this all, whether or not you have all of this, any of it, some combination or none of it, is that you should really know your vision of the show. And that's the main thing that you want to convey with your pitch deck. You know, convey the world. If you have characters developed, convey those characters, convey the story. I would say even more than the look of the show and the design of the show, you're pitching the concept of the show. And, you know, if it's not fully developed, it's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of studios, when you pitch to them, they want to get their hands into your work and have their influence on it. So being able to flex and say, yeah, this is where I think my show is going. This is my vision for it, but I'm not 100% tied down to it. If you guys want to buy it and change it, I'm totally fine with that, and we can work together. But there should be some aspect of your show that is unchangeable. And it's that one thing that it's the reason that they have to go with you for the show. It's like, it's your vision of the show. Like, it would not be my show if not for this thing. And that's, you know, it's all about getting noticed, right? So you want to stand out in a crowd. You have all this competition of content that looks like everything else, right? And so how do you stand out in a crowd? How do you appeal to everybody when appeal is kind of subjective? You know, how do you fit the needs of what the studio wants versus what you want? And so a good way to get started on that and to get a heads up is to look at, you know, what kids are used to seeing, right? And this lecture is going to be geared mostly towards pre-K content, but I would say it applies across the board, even if you're pitching to like a primetime series or a feature. But for kids content, you know, look to what they're used to. Look to kids books. You know, get the different looks and feels of the kids books, and, you know, how does this represent whoever created it? How does it represent the feel of the show and the world that you're going to create? Another good thing to look for is kids' toys, right? I mean, just from a business perspective, if you're going to sell a show to a network, they're probably going to want to make toys. So it has to fit in line with what kids are used to having. But even more than that, the look of these toys specifically, like, really pay attention to all the details. You know, what is it these have in common? What are the shapes? What are the colors that kids are used to? And how can that sort of help to influence your show and your design choices? And if you look at the things that all these things have in common, usually very basic shapes, like really, really basic shapes, like circles and triangles and squares, and really basic colors, right? Like just out of the box colors, like out of the box red, out of the box green, because, you know, especially for kids, and again, this changes as you age up the show, but for preschool stuff, for kindergarten stuff, you know, kids, it's a learning process. They're still learning the names of colors. You don't want to create characters that are too advanced for them. You know, really simple patterns. Kids respond to a high contrast, right? Like reds against greens, blacks and whites. Like, it's a very rich color range. And you'll find high saturation, like really, really deep values. And then you'll find really pastel-y stuff, like a Winnie the Pooh type stuff. And what all of this stuff serves to do is it creates like a mood and a tone of the piece, and it creates the genre of your work. And I'll get more into the details of that later, but I mean, I want to start with looking at the color palette, right? So here's from Hilda, if you guys have seen it, it's on Netflix. You know, there's like a language here that's being told to the audience about what this show feels like and who this character is based on her color and her design and the color of the backgrounds and just the overall feel of it. So it's kind of a muted colors, and it's a little more subdued, but it's, you know, they're sort of in between primary colors and tertiary colors here. And that's, you know, something to consider, like, what's the feel of your show? Because for this palette, it very much matches this show. It's a little adventurous, and but they didn't. It's not like an educational show, so they didn't want to go with like primary colors. Um, but in general, and this might seem obvious, but it merits saying, like if you have really bright colors, it's going to affect the mood. You're going to have a really bright mood. If you have really dark colors, it's going to be kind of a dark mood, and anything in between is going to feel more like this. But it's good to ask yourself, like, what is your color scheme, and what does it mean for your show? What does it mean for your characters? What does it represent? What does it evoke in the audience's mind? If we look at an example here of these 4 shows, right, you can immediately tell what's the spirit of the show, right? You've got the Muppets, and it's like a rainbow of colors, and it's very bright. It just has this like, oh, this is like for little kids. It's very educational to it, versus the characters in the top right. It's like, this is some sort of high fantasy show. There's lots of purples and greens and oranges, and it's kind of dark and mysterious, and it gives an overall feel. And then the show I worked on, the bottom left, it's like adventure. There's oranges and purples and greens, and it's just it's a lot more dynamic. And then a show on the bottom right, it's mostly primary colors, mostly colors that attract little boys. It's about trains. Everything's kind of hard angles, with a little bit of softness, but you can immediately tell, who each show is meant for. And that's, it's all based on the choices that whoever designed these made. It's very clear, positive choices. There's no ambiguity here about who is being, what child would be gravitated towards which show and why. And a lot of that has to do with the shape language. And it's like the feel of the show is going to come from how your characters actually look. Are they really rounded characters? I mean, pre-K is mostly soft shapes, so you're going to see a lot of circles, a lot of ovals, a lot of rounded corners. If you look at all these characters here, I mean, they're all made up of those shapes and basically nothing else. I mean, one might be a little bit more like a rectangle. Their bag is kind of rectangular, but they have curved edges. Everything's kind of rounded off. And so again, this is geared towards pre-K, where things are kind of soft. You want to age your show, right? And as the content ages, you might get characters made out of hard triangles and really hard, big, bold shapes. But the main thing about the design is to really keep it very basic. Here we have an example from the 80s, I think, of Fraggle Rock. And, it was a kid's show. And again, really basic stuff, really simple shapes, simple colors, and it's really relatable to that audience. It's really age appropriate, right? You're not going to, if you're making pre-K content, you're not going to make things that are like harsh and scary. You're going to make things that are soft and gentle and the kids can relate to. And what's the personality of your show? Like the language of the shapes of your characters and your backgrounds are going to convey a certain personality, and it's all based on design choices, right? So you have things like eye shape to consider. Are they rounded? Are they oval? Are they little dot eyes? What's their mouth shape? If we look at the Muppets here, everyone's got like a half moon mouth shape and little circle eyes, and their body parts are all generally the same. They're kind of these little noodle arms, and their height for pre-K content is basically the same height. As a few variations that stand out. You see Big Bird and Snuffleupagus, but everybody else is kind of the same size. They almost look exactly the same. They're just varied a little bit. And the color palette, again, like I mentioned earlier, this show is like a rainbow of colors. And the reason for that is to tie everything together, right? Like your show should feel like harmonious with itself. If you see the characters from the Storybot show here, again, it's like rainbow colors. And even though they're all wildly different, they work together as a rainbow. The same thing with the Muppet Babies. They're still, it's like the rainbow colors, and their size is basically the same. Their shapes are basically the same. For pre-K content, you don't see a ton of variation. All the Muppet Babies here basically the same height. They're almost the same character. And again, they all have the same color palette. They all live in the same world. And for kid shows, their personalities don't range a lot. You might have the character that's a little more grumpy or a little more goofy, but that's probably the extent of it. I mean, kids are still learning what emotions are and what personalities are. So you don't want to like throw everything at them. You want to keep it really simple. There's an argument to be made that like the Muppet Babies are all kind of the same personality. They're all pretty happy, easygoing, just with slight variations. And you look at these other shows here, again, the same rules you can see across, like they all have the same eye shape. They all have the same kind of shape language for their bodies, mouth shapes, if they have mouths. But even though there's different styles, they're all basically the same. They're all basically the same height. They all live in the same world together. And this is really, what you're driving after. And again, for prime time, the range of possibilities opens up. But even in a primetime show, it's all about being consistent, right? You're trying to create a believable world. And some examples of that you can see here. All these worlds, they work with themselves, right? You see Dora matches Diego, I think his name is, this monkey friend, and they match the background. The color palettes are all married together. You see the Simpsons, everybody's yellow or some variation of yellow. The backgrounds all work. They all have the same mouth shape, the same eyes, the same brow. There's whatever design features you want in your show. Just make sure it's reflected. You don't want characters that don't work with each other, right? If you look at examples from the past of shows that might not be highly regarded as having great design, one character is like live action rotoscoped, and the other character is really like a Walt Disney feature animation villain next to a really cartoonish character, or like a character in the top right here who's kind of like a Snow White character with other characters around her that are, out of the 1920s. It just doesn't quite mesh. And the audience will pick up on that, even if they're not aware of what they're looking at, why it doesn't work. They can just feel like, oh, that just felt kind of discombobulated. Shows in the bottom right here, I know they did this on purpose, but a lot of the reason why this show, I think, didn't get the success that it could have is because it just looks like a visual mess. You want things to work together. But of course, there's exceptions to the rule. I think this is The Secret World of Gumball. And here you can see that, there's wildly different design choices here. You have flat characters, you've got characters with hard angles, you've got claymation, you have I think it's like a 3D or a puppet, you've got pixel art, and it's all on a live action background. But there's a reason for this, right? And the reason a show like this could work, it's not just that it's a unique case and that they're breaking the rules, they're doing it on purpose. So we're talking about juxtaposition, right? Like that show worked because of the juxtaposition, and there's like a rhyme and reason why you want to juxtapose your characters. If you look at Stitch here, I mean, basic shape language works in the world, but their design choices between the humans and the aliens is wildly different. It's jarring by its nature, but there's always a reason for it, right? And you want to keep things like the charm alive and the visual contrast arrive. But the main thing, like an example of Stitch here, is it fit the story. There was a reason why, because they're aliens from another planet, they are supposed to not fit in. They're supposed to be wildly designed, very, very different design than the humans. And again, that just reinforces the idea that your design should support your story. Like whatever your narrative is, whatever your world is, the design should reflect that in some way. And if you're looking to create a show and put it out there, and you have this idea for a show and you're not sure what the look of it should be, you can write the story, but you need an artist to fill it in, or vice versa. You could always do your research and research not only your audience and but other shows that are already out there. And on the business end of it, research who you're going to sell to. right? And that's, you should really know your buyer. Like who are you pitching to? What's their brand, right? Like what shows have they done in the past? What do they typically look for in new content when you see their new shows coming out? Are they the same as the shows that came before? Or do they seem to be going in a new trajectory? Do they have that one project that's a little edgy? And do you think maybe, oh, they're looking for something new? But you're basically just trying to figure out what's their style and what is their budget for the show. Like what are the limitations? And you want to factor that into what you're going to pitch them. Is this in their wheelhouse to accomplish or not? And is it even what they're looking for? I mean, you don't want to bring something that looks like this, like a Walt Disney feature, to Aardman, right? Who does really soft claymation stuff. Both are going to be great, but it's about the capabilities of the studio doing it, the interests of the studio doing it. You just wouldn't expect Aardman to pick up a Walt Disney feature type show, just as you wouldn't expect something like Dark Crystal to be picked up by the people who make Daniel Tiger. It's just, you have to really know who you're pitching to and be kind of smart about it, be kind of strategic about it. If you have your show, there's really like a two-pronged approach here. You can either go with their programming, right, and really cater your content to fit what they're probably looking for, or you might want to be a little risky and throw them something out of left field. Maybe you've pitched your stuff to Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network and they just don't pick it up, and so you think, you know what, I'm going to try to pitch this show to a studio that would never pick this up. And you never know if this might be just exactly what they're looking for. I've had a couple friends pitch a show that was just didn't seem to fit the network they were pitching to, and they loved it. They're like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. You couldn't have come at a better time. So that's just like a basic run through. And I know a lot of it's like really basic character design stuff, but when you're making a pitch deck, it has to be readable like right away. People need to get it just by flipping through, because you're going to sometimes have the opportunity to sit down and pitch through. Sometimes you're just going to hand a packet to them and they're going to flip through it on their lunch hour. And if it pops out to them, they'll call you back. But either way, you're all prepared, you have your stuff. So how do you get to that next step of actually pitching this and finding the right people to pitch to? And a lot of it is luck and timing, right? Being at the right place at the right time with the right stuff. And you want to keep your eyes open for those opportunities, right? They're going to show up. They're usually going to show up when you least expect them. And somebody's going to say something offhandedly, and you're just going to have to recognize, like, oh, they're looking for this specific thing. I have this specific thing, or I could very quickly put together something that they're looking for. And I just happen to be at the right place at the right time. I think it was Kathleen Kennedy of the Star Wars lore, says that success is a matter of some luck and some timing. And, she's had an amazing career, but I think she'll admit, and I think anybody who's wildly successful like that will admit, I was just in the right place at the right time. And it's about, your connections. And something like Animation Israel, which you guys are all really lucky to be a part of, is one of those connections. Like, you guys have this resource here of people who are connected in the industry that you can put your material in front of, and they can help you navigate those really crazy waters of getting your content in front of people who might want to pick up the next big thing. So, I would encourage everybody here to reach out to who you know, and, to really just kind of network. I know with COVID and everything, it's crazy to get out there and do a mixer or anything like that, but, just reach out, email people, write people on Instagram, however you can reach these people to stay connected and to stay informed about what people want, getting yourself noticed. I would highly encourage you guys to do that. And there's, when you come to the actual pitch, it might not always look like what you think it is. A lot of the times it looks like this image here. of a meeting in a coffee shop. It's not like you go into a studio and they sit you down in a boardroom. Sometimes it's just like a walk and talk in the street. Sometimes it's a phone call. Sometimes you're in the elevator and there's a producer that and you recognize, and you're like, oh, hey, I have a great idea for a show. And you have 20 seconds before the bell goes off to open the doors to pitch them your show to get interest. So how do you do that? My father-in-law had an example where when he did Cow and Chicken, he just happened to hear that Ted Turner, this was through a friend of his at the time, was looking for a show. And he was looking for, I think, 50 shows to be submitted to Cartoon Network because he was opening a whole new network and he needed content. And so his pitch was basically a coffee shop meeting where he sat down, he brought his kid's book with him, he showed him the book, and that was it. It was like a 5-minute coffee conversation. And they said, this is great, we would love to see more. And in this case, he didn't have a full pitch deck, but it was still enough. It still like, it covered everything a pitch deck would cover, that you could get a sense of the world. And they asked him to take his children's book and actually go and create a pilot episode. And what would this pilot look like? And so he went through and, even still just on paper, he didn't like produce a pilot, put together like, yeah, this is what an episode would look like. And you probably, if you've seen the show, recognize this scene where they're at the table and, they arguing over cereal and, the crazy antics of his world. And just, what other episodes would look like, how they get around, who they interact with, what the characters look like, a little bit more character exploration, more about who the characters are to each other. He changed things too. In the children's book, I don't think they were siblings, they were friends or something, but after talking to the people for Cartoon Network, he realized, oh, I got to kind of retool this because this is going to appeal to them more. And if I make them friends, if I make them a brother and sister, I think they were, it's going to be more relatable. And then introducing the other characters of the world and putting his unique spin on it, right? Like they live in their nice house with their mom and dad. And then he created this really ingenious thing where the parents aren't really all there all the time. And so they're literally not all there. And, this is his personal take on things, but, it's getting his voice across. And, what are the characters of his world and his imagination? And there's no real formula to this, right? Like some people go in with a kid's book, some people go in with a full pitch deck, some people go in with clips of shows that they are trying to already produce. And that's good because it works to your advantage and it keeps you open to, how you can flex to fit whoever you're pitching to. Some people want a whole pitch Bible, like really detailed. I want to see episodes, I want to see characters, I want to see turnarounds, I want to see backgrounds. And some people don't want anything. Some people just want to hear your idea. Some people just want a poster. I had a friend who said when I was doing research for this lecture that it's a lot like dating, and you get out there, you go to the bar and you pitch something to somebody and they respond really well or they don't. And the next day or the next person, you do the same thing and it doesn't work. And even, you have to adapt. You have to really, be aware of the room you're pitching to, basically. And the main thing is like, why is this your show? What's your personal style? And what aside from all these design rules I went through and all the things that probably should be in a pitch deck, what is it that makes this uniquely yours, right? Play to your strengths. And what's the audience that you want to go for? Like, how can you be true to yourself? And, if you're a writer, you might just have the writing side of it. And maybe you can be, you can find some artists to help create some content for you to support your writing, or vice versa. You're just an artist and you don't have the writing side. You don't really know how to create an episode, but you're really good at character design, or you're really good at like the world building aspect of it. And you have this high concept and, any and all of it work for a pitch, as long as your personal vision of the show is really clear. And I found that, you know, less is more as far as these things go. Like, you just want to give them enough to imagine more. And this also works in your favor from a business standpoint, because while you're playing to their imagination, you're also not giving them enough that they can think, hey, we could just do this show without this person. Because if they can, well, why wouldn't they? If you come to them and they're like, yeah, we could, you know, hire a whole team and do a show just like this. Let's say, thank you so much for your pitch, we're not interested. And then 2 years later, you see the movie on the screen and you're like, hey, that was my idea. And so you want to make yourself indispensable from your show. And, you know, so for the less is more approach, you might have like a reel, you might have a teaser. I think you don't necessarily have to do either of those to sell a show. You might have it, and if they ask for it, you might want to show it. But and this is also different if you're pitching for a show to be made, or if you have a show and you're trying to sell it. And of course, if you have a show and you're trying to sell it to a broadcaster, you definitely want a teaser or a reel to show for your work, to say this is the thing you're going to be airing. But if you're early in the stage, or I think I've been told most people here are, I've found in my experience and the experience of others, whenever you have something like this, studios tend to shy away from it. And I think the best I've been able to glean from that is that they feel like, what do you need us for? You clearly can do this already on your own. You know, you have a team, or this is like your independent project, and you have this look, and, you know, what are we going to do? It's already realized. You know, they want to be part of the process. But again, there's always exceptions. And of course, this is sort of like the second case that I mentioned, where they had a whole production studio and they had a test for what their movie would look like. And they wanted to sell it to a distributor, and they ended up pairing with Netflix. So that's, you know, it's a different approach that works for a different stage in the process. You might just have a children's book, and it might be your own children's book. It might be an adaptation of something, but this can be totally viable for a pitch deck. Just bringing your book to the meeting and say, this is it. This is my world. This is my show. It could just be a poster, right? It could be that's you have all this stuff written down on paper, or you're just going to pitch it in the room and get the sense of it to the people you're talking to. And all you need is just one nice piece of art to represent your show. And that might be enough to get them interested. You know, and for anybody who's starting out, of course, like, you know, keep learning about the business side of it, about art and art theory and design and story. I mean, we're at Warner Brothers and Walt Disney, we have classes for all the employees that people regularly take. You're never at a point where like, I've got it. I mean, I'm good. I don't need to continue going back to school for this. Like, there's always something to learn. The industry is always changing. People's interests are always changing. The look of what gets picked up or not is always changing. And it's good to, you know, just be well-rounded. If you're a story guy, you should probably take an art class or a business class, and vice versa. When I was at CalArts, you know, they made us take acting classes, and, you know, we were encouraged to go look at the dancers and talk to the dancers and understand movement from the people whose whole thing is about how to move your body. Just doing that cross-pollination will really inform your work. And, you know, no matter what you take, to get back to that main point, is that whatever your pitch deck is going to look like, it needs to feel like you. Like, you're not just selling your vision, but it's like the excitement behind your vision. And you know, there was a friend of mine who used to say, like, you're not really selling the material that you're pitching, you're selling yourself. And what he meant by that was, you know, they want to be able to work with you, right? And it should feel like they can't do this show without you, right? Like, when you think of Walt Disney and his creations, you can't really do them apart. And people tried, right? People, I think his first character was Oswald, right? And somebody literally took it from him and was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do your thing. And he couldn't do it. It just wasn't successful. You know, and again, if they can do this without you, they will, right? So like, you want to make sure that you're tied to your work in such a way, like you have Jim Henson is Kermit. You know, this is one of my classmates, and her show is her. And Alex, another one of my classmates, his show, that you could not do it without him. And that's one of the main things, like no matter what you create, is you have to sell yourself. The pitch should be you. You should feel confident that like nobody else could come in and pitch this for you. Nobody could pull off this show. This whole studio couldn't make this without you. And it's all about believing in your work. And that's really the main and last point I wanted to drive here is like, you know, you should really enjoy what you're doing, believe in it. You know, there's an old writing trope that says, if you don't enjoy making it, why would you expect anybody to be interested in it? If you're not having fun writing it or drawing it, how is an audience going to like what you're doing? How is somebody going to want to pay you $20 million to make your show or your movie? So this is, I mean, above everything else, I think, as long as you're creating content that it's very clear what the world is, it's very clear that you're attached to it and that you believe in it, I think you would have a leg up on the thousands upon thousands of people pitching to shows and networks every day. So cool. So thank you, everybody. That's what I've got. And I wanted to open up for any questions and answers. Looking forward to hearing from you guys.
Thank you, John.
Stop sharing this so you don't have to stare at a huge thank you. That was
great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that was very informative and inspiring. If anybody has questions and either wants to do them on camera or put them in the chat, feel free.
Don't all jump at once.
I've never seen such a bunch of shy Israelis in my life.
I mean, it can be questions about anything too. I mean, about how to pitch or getting into the industry, or, you know, if you guys have your own projects and you're curious about how to get off the ground, you can share where you're at. Or
so one thing that's come up in past sessions is like, hey, I'm a writer, how do I find a designer? Hey, I'm a designer, how do I find a writer? So within the Israeli community, please like feel free to email us at info@animationisrael.com, and we're looking to put together some sort of like speed dating or some sort of event that kind of helps people kind of marry up on like-minded projects. So we're looking to do that. And also people who are kind of concerned about, hey, I have a concept, but it's not quite polished. We are putting together a workshop where we're going to review some of these main concepts that John went over, go into a bit more depth, and actually give you feedback on your specific project. So it won't be lecture format. It'll be part lecture, but part workshop where you get one-on-one experience and one-on-one feedback. So there's a
question in the chat. You see it?
It says, can you talk a bit about the process of finding the right buyers for your show? Like, how do you even get to know them?
Yeah, so I mean, one way is what you just mentioned, going through something like Animation Israel, or you know, here in LA we have the Animation Guild, which has, you know, stuff that you can, you know, find on their website to get those sort of connections. But I mean, really, it's about doing your research. It's about looking to who you're buying, who the buyer would be, and what do they typically look for. And through your connections, if you can catch any wind of what they're looking for now versus what they've done, I think that is a good way to figure out who you should take your show to. You know, and it's good sometimes to get an objective look at your content, to pitch it around to people before you pitch it, and to say, like, what does this feel like to you? and somebody might look at it and be like, oh, you've got to pitch to Nickelodeon. They're looking for something like this. This totally fits Nickelodeon. And you might not even realize it. I mean, a lot of artists and writers can't, they don't have the best judge of their own work, right? Like it's hard for them to see what their best work is and their worst work and where their stuff really fits. You might be striving to fit a certain style and it really looks more like something else. I mean, I think like famous musicians, they usually hate their top hit, right? And they're like, really? You guys like that one? Okay, I guess I'll play it the rest of my life now. And but it's true for art too. I think artists like Picasso and Michelangelo, like they hated the stuff that they're most renowned for. So it's good to get an objective opinion to sort of point you in the right direction. And just look at who's creating what content. Really be aware of like, oh, this project was produced by these people. Look at the names on the credits and be like, oh, what projects are these people attached to? And sort of realize like, oh, this is their little circle. And this is the sort of content that they gravitate towards. And if I have something that fits that, or if I can make something like if I can cater my work to fit that, those are the type of people I'd probably want to approach about this. On a technical side, you typically don't approach them directly. They usually have an agent or a manager or something like that, where you have to go through that sort of medium to talk to these people. A lot of studios have screeners, and they will screen all the content that comes through a studio and organize it before it gets onto the desk of whoever is going to actually pull the trigger and pick up that phone and call you back. Let's see, there's a question here.
John, 1 second, just to add to that first question. So when we're talking about buyers for a show, particularly for people who are working in the preschool market, I know this is different for prime time. And even for 6 to 11, a lot of them have, as we talked in past sessions, an educational mandate, and you can really go to, and a lot of those broadcasters are even publicly funded. If you think of like the BBC or TVO or PBS, you can go to their websites and it will tell you point blank, this is the messaging, this is the curriculum that needs to be there. So kind of right off the bat, for anything that has an educational bent, where it will sit well and where it won't sit well before you kind of pick up the phone. And then the other part is that, honestly, I've been networking in this industry for almost 15 years. This is part of what Animation Israel is here for, is to take a look at your shows and say, hey, you know what, that one would work well for Disney Junior, not Nick, or kind of to help give you some guidance, because it is a little bit daunting and a little overwhelming, particularly from Israel. I know right now everything's on Zoom, but in general in LA, you stop by and have a cup of coffee or stop by and have lunch. And so we're here to help you with some kind of boots on the ground to make sure the right show is being pitched to the right person.
Yeah, so, that's really, and I think that is true. I think it's something unique. The first thing you mentioned about the network that tells you what they want. That's unique to pre-K content. Usually it's not that easy.
You gotta love the public broadcasters, right?
Right, yeah, they're great. But yeah, but occasionally though, there is content on a studio site where you can submit stuff, and they will give you a rough guideline of what they want. It's usually pretty vague, but yeah, they use a lot of keywords to say, we want this sort of show. And yeah, again, it's just, you have to do your research.
So the next question is, if this is your first time to pitch a show, how do you know when it's ready to be pitched?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any positive answer on when a project is ready, other than when you feel it's ready. When you feel like you've developed your world enough that you know it, that you've developed your characters enough that you really know it and you really believe in them. And when you can have something to represent that, and I would try to just test it on people. You have your project and pitch it to your friends and say, what do you think? Does this do anything for you? Does this, do you get a clear picture of what I'm going for here? And, hopefully they're honest with you and they'll tell you yes or no, or I didn't really get this thing, and sort of, go back and forth. I remember when there's a good story about Walt Disney and how he would pitch stuff. And so he would pitch a movie to somebody in the room, and he would wait until that moment when they sort of like stop looking and wander off, and he realized, oh, I lost them. And then he would tell the story again to somebody else, changing that part where he lost that one person. He would just adapt and adapt and adapt and modify his stuff until he finally had something that he could pitch to anybody, and they were captivated the whole time. So I think, yeah, knowing your content and knowing that the way you're pitching it has captured people's attention, it's a good way to know that your project is ready to be pitched. Again, as far as the art or the writing or what episodes look like, it all depends on what the people buying it are looking for. And it's just about being conscious of that. It goes back to that first question, like finding the buyer, doing your research, staying connected. Those two kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, and Animation Israel is planning to put together a pitch to your peer. Sorry.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Oh, I lost you.
Cool. Do we have time for more questions? I see a few popped up. Oh, are we there?
This quickly, John. Animation Israel is planning to put together a pitch to your peers kind of event, where that's gonna kind of help kind of with that question. Hey, am I ready to go to market? Because particularly Israel being an emerging market, anything that we as a collective community put out into the greater world market kind of sets the tone for how responsive people in general are going to be to content from Israel. So I do think it is important that things are polished and sharp and ready to go, because we are all kind of collectively representing each other in this.
Right. Yeah. Cool.
So the next one, do you know any shows for grown-ups that look childish or naive? Something like Don Hertzfeld's work, The Boy in the World. Do you think it's acceptable as a series to kind of essentially have a cross-brand look, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it all depends on who your audience is. Like whatever you feel your show should look at, if it fits your story and it fits your world. There's shows for adults that look like my daughter drew it, right? And that's not a bad thing. It's just that was the feel that worked for that show. It should be intentional, I think, but I think if you pitch it to the right network, there's a lot of stuff on Adult Swim that looks kind of childish, but it's a grown-up show and there's grown-up content. There's sort of a trend now actually about shows that look like they were drawn by kids, and then they talk about all sorts of inappropriate adult stuff, and it's about who's going to be watching and who's going to be buying. Yeah, I mean, there's no steadfast rules about the look of your show. Again, as long as it's represents you.
Cool. So the next question is from Andrew. He is one of the presenters from our last two sessions.
Cool.
Very prolific writer, voice actor, and show creator. So he loved your talk, and his question is, how long would you suggest staying with a pitch that you really believe in? If it's been turned down by a couple of studios, do you keep running with it?
Yeah, my friend Darren, that I knew at CalArts, she did the Star and the Forces of Evil show. That was based on a short film that she did at CalArts, and she shopped that around for years and years and years. And she didn't change it too much. She stuck to her vision. I think she took it to all over Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and nobody was really interested. And it took her years to get it off the ground. She finally landed at Disney, I think. And I'm not sure the whole story there of how she got it there, but I mean, there is something to, if you believe in it, if you continue to believe in your show, I don't know if there's a limit to when you should stop and give it up and move on to something else. I have a friend who's been pitching a show for 25 years and nobody's picked it up. And it's not that it's a bad show, it's a really cool show, but again, it's luck and timing, right? Is this show something that people want right now? Is it before its time? Is it ahead of its time? Is it when's the right moment for this show? And if that moment passed, is that moment going to come up again in the future? Like things tend to go in like a 20-year loop. People, for some reason, I mean, this is true across all design. Like the design of a Coke bottle will be reminiscent of the Coke bottle from 20 years ago. It's just this weird thing that happens. So yeah, I mean, you might, if you get exhausted of pitching it around town, you might just put it on the shelf and wait for those moments when you're like, oh, wait, and then you have it ready. You have this project and it's ready to pitch, and it's exactly what people are going to look for at that moment. But yeah, I mean, if you continue to believe in it, hold on to it. That's not to say don't venture out into other projects, but yeah, if there's that one that you really believe in, you want to sell one day, there's no reason not to hold on to it.
Atomic Betty took 8 years of pitching to get
Sure.
through, you know.
Yeah.
So, and essentially launched a studio along the way. So yeah. So lastly, why is the market divided into preschool and 6 to 11? Can a show be targeted at a mid-range like ages 4 to 8?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, yes, certain studios, and this is just from my own observation. I don't have a ton of experience in dealing with the demographics, but I think there are definitely shows that are in that mid-range. I know as a parent, there's shows that I would not show to my 2-year-old that I'm like, yeah, my 8-year-old can watch that. And I don't know, I can't speak in too much detail about that one, but I imagine studios are conscious of this. I know just from working at Warner Brothers and Disney, they're hyper conscious of all their demographics, almost to a fault. And they will, the marketing team will request story changes a lot of the times. Like really, marketing has the final say on your product, unfortunately. And if, we experienced this on Scoob, when I was on Scoob, we had things in the movie that worked great for the story. They worked great for the characters. The executives loved it. And then marketing stepped in and said, you know what? We're selling this to this demographic. We're selling these toys. We need you to have this thing in the movie, or we need you to take that part out of the movie. And if they can't sell your product based on that, then, you're not going to be able to have a successful show.
I think this one gets back a lot to what you were saying earlier, John, about knowing who you're selling what to. Like we had earlier this year, like in late summer, with McCore Foundation, we did an international introduction series. We brought in Shaftesbury from Canada, Wild Brain from the UK, and we brought in Disney Junior and Disney TV animation. And Disney was very, very specific. Preschool ends at 5, TV animation starts at 6. Other networks or broadcasters have what they call bridge shows. And I think that's what this question is going to, like, who deals with the bridge shows? So that's something that we can help you with. But yes, there are broadcasters that have that 4 to 8 or the 6 to 9 or 5 to 9 kind of shows that aren't quite so pigeonholed. But Disney is definitely not one of those, as John's saying. They are kind of almost to a fault. But that gets back to John's concept of you need to know what you're pitching, who you're pitching it to, know your show, know where it's going to land, where you want it to land, and know your buyers. So on that, I believe that is our last question. And out of respect for John's time, I want to just thank you very much for your time and openness and your expertise. It was much appreciated, and
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing everybody, put their content out there. I'm excited. I'm taking note of all the names here.
I can send them to you later on.
Oh, good.